I was 17 years old when I started in June of 1975. At that time, there was this original mill. The only thing that's original is this building here. Most of the machinery that's in here right now has been replaced from when I started.
Come here when I was 18, they said they'll try me out for a couple of weeks and see how it goes. And I'm creeping up to 58 in the spring, so you guys can do the math. Nobody ever gave me a final answer in that. I'm still here after 40 years, so it must have worked out pretty good.
I started working here in about the mid-1980s. The person who had run the machines that I took over had been here, I think, since he was old enough to stand in front of those machines, and taught me the mechanics of what's called the loom.
I'm Monica Macausland, 6th generation here at Macausland's Woollen Mill, owner-operator with 5th generation Alex Macausland, and we've been making wool blankets and yarn since the 1930s. Before that, we were sawing grist mill from 1870-ish on. What really sets us apart is not just doing the custom work potential, but also that we make blankets. There's a number of places that weave, but don't necessarily do all the steps leading up to the weaving. And the other mills that start from the raw fiber to, say, the finished product, trying to stop at the yarn. But at times they have partnered with us and supplying the yarn for us to do blankets for them in that way.
It used to amaze me how far away in this big world that they would know about this little building on Prince Edward Island that produced 100% pure wool blankets. And they've gone from California to any place in the States. But when we shipped yarn to Australia, I just couldn't believe that. The wool capital, basically, of the world, or producers of the world, for this little woolen mill to ship wool yarn to anyway. Generation after generation can say that they've got blankets from here that they've had for, like, what can you get today that's going to last 100 years?
Got to meet a lot of people and find out how sturdy and how warm and how admired these blankets were. Like, you'd have people come in here from the United States, Germany, anywhere, almost anywhere in the world actually. And they've had these blankets, they knew about them. A lot of the times they had one passed down from parents or grandparents, and they were finally got to the island where they were made, so they wanted to learn about them and pick up a new one for themselves. So yeah, that was pretty interesting.
The process has pretty much stayed the same, though there's been a few changes over the years. We are vertically integrated from the raw wool arriving to the finished products. We used to be powered by a water wheel. Now it's all 3-phase electric into the grid. The raw wool arrives, we grade it, dust it, wash it. Sometimes we dye. Other times just skip to drying before it's then picked, carded, spun, twisted, or coned as 1-ply. We make anywhere from 2 to 5-ply yarn, and we also weave blankets using our 1-ply. So the wool arrives. Either farmers will bring it in feed bags, like you name it, we've received it. Anything from pet sheep, like having 6 to 12 pounds, or anything from a large flock sending like 15,000 pounds at a time. Some is better than others. It's getting harder to get the best quality, but there are a few out there that really heads above. There is just some that we can't use, and that is what we would grade off. Once we have that graded and sorted, we dust it, is the name, and what it is it just tears it into smaller pieces for a deeper clean when it goes into the washing machine, which is kind of also referred to as like a washing train. It's got the 3 tubs to it, 2 washes and a cold rinse. And then it either gets dyed into the colors as mentioned, or it gets dried and baled. The dryer is, if you see it, it's the Easy Bake Oven on steroids. It's a nice conveyor belt through the heat, and then it comes out at the end by the baler. Bale it up anywhere from 1 to 200 pounds per bale.
I can remember before we had this big dryer system for wool that they have now, we spread it out on just the yard up off the mill property here, spread it out in the grass, wet wool, let the sun dry it, then we go rake it up and bag it up and bring it down. So from there, it would go into what's called a carding machine. I kind of forget my terms.
It has 2 breakers. The first one, it comes off kind of looking like insulation or cotton candy, and it just goes back and forth into the second breaker, which is where it gets divided into 64 ends, 4 ends of 16 to a spool. It's a 1-ply, but it's very weak 1-ply, kind of like a heavy cobweb. It's something that artisans are able to work with to knit beautiful garments where it's very lightweight but still very dense and fluffy. Holds the warmth because, again, wool is wonderful. But we can't really run it through the machines to make anything or to spin in that state. So that's where the spinning frame comes into play.
This machine that we're looking at, the spinning frame, and that would spin the yarn, the weak fibers, into a sturdy yarn. And from these bobbins that you look at here, they would go over to another machine and they would make smaller bobbins that I would use in the loom to weave the products.
So from the frame, the workable 1-ply, neither goes towards being blankets or yarn. If it's going for yarn, we've got the twister set up, and that takes it anywhere from a 2 or a 3-ply. For custom orders, we will do a 5-ply, but there's minimums there. And from the twister, once it's twisted onto the spools, it goes onto the skeiner, where we will make 20 skeins at a time, which equals 5 pounds for the easy measuring whenever it comes to how many rounds to put onto it. Once we've got that rounds count perfected, we'll do the rest of the sets with that, doing periodic checks. And the skeins get taken off the skeiner, but it'll fill up the hook, because the hook is where we make it into the butterfly skein by twisting it. It's one of the ones that a lot of people are scared of at first, because if you get hooked on it, the reflex is to pull. That's not what you do. If you push it in, it stops the break, you put the skein on, it twists it nice and tight. But if we already have that filled, we will store them as a loop on a lock. We put them into the bags that we store them in upstairs. Once those bags are full, they get taken upstairs and stored or put to the shelf for sale, or right into orders that we then send out. And that's the story on the yarn. When it comes to the blankets, when it's coming from the frame, it's going to be going to the coner. It'll be coned anywhere from 4 to 5 pounds per cone. Cones are used in the warping as well as the weft. Primarily the weft is what we're doing, where you'll see them stored in all of our different colors that we offer for when people order. They want a navy blue blanket. We've got the navy on hand, plug it into the loom and weave it. Or customizing, maybe they want a blue blanket with pink stripes or a blue and pink checkerboard. We can make that by the orders.
I was always amazed at the skill of the people that must have invented these machines, and especially the carding machine. When you look at it going and you see so many different parts, something's going one way, something's going another way. It's just amazing.
The loom that was here when I began, it made about 4 to 5 inches of blankets. Then you had to stop the machine and by hand take the bobbin out that was in there and replace it with a new one. So every 4 to 5 inches you were stopping the machine, putting a new bobbin in, and running that. The machine itself didn't have a way to measure the distance to put the stripe in, so we had to measure that simply with a string. We'd tuck it into the cloth that was being woven, and when it got to the end of the string, that's when you put your end stripe in. That was all done by hand. Our mentors, Harry and Alan Macausland, bought a couple of more updated looms. They had an automatic bobbin changer, which meant you could leave the loom run continuously. And when the bobbin got low, instead of stopping the loom to replace it, it had a magazine on one end that just kept feeding them while it was running. It also had a mechanism on the newer looms that would know when to put the stripe on. It would automatically call the different colored bobbin up and run across the 20 times, however thick you wanted your stripe. And then it'd go back down and put the rest of the blanket in. So yeah, that was a big improvement. That provided a lot more blankets than what I could make on the earlier looms.
I'm a full-time maintenance guy here, and machines are probably that one's in 1955, and some are in the 40s, and you can't get all the parts for it. You got to make them. Between me and the machine shop, we've seen so far keep everything running, but it's getting harder and harder every year to get parts. Like, these machines break, I can almost walk up to it and see what's going on. Like, we had one of the looms break down there last year, and it's all computerized. We didn't know what it would be to get a fella here looking at it, and the machine was out of time. And I would have never found that in a million years. And even the fellow that come here said he only seen that once in 20 years. So, like, if something breaks on this, it's pretty well a given you know what it is. The new looms, though, the old looms, you might make 20 a day. Like blankets, the old shuttle looms, with the new technology, if the loom's working, there's no problem to make 50, 60 blankets a day, no problem. But like anything else, you have your good and bad days with all this equipment kicking around. There's going to be something.
That loom that I started on, that was ancient to begin with, even when I started. So parts weren't readily available. So we had to be rather constructive if we lost a part or something broke. It was very difficult to replace, and we did a lot of our own repairs.
I could have a week, there'd be nothing going, nothing breaking, but I had a piece break in this machine beside us one day. It was a chain, and I knew I couldn't get the chain. I had to go up to John Deere and buy 80 joiner links. It took me a day and a half to make a 6-foot chain. Some things you have to do.
10,
Bang.
9, 3,
5.
bang. 1.
Bang.
Oh, Tony.
Double no.
In the mornings, we start off with a game of cards and checking in with everybody, seeing what the game plan is. And I don't know, I think that just helps with the morale, really, and keeping everyone as a team.
Really, from the time you were a kid, this is all you really wanted. You wanted to be down around here. You wanted to take over the mill.
So by the time I was actually allowed to come on in, like, as a teenager, I think I was 15 my first summer working here. I was pretty gung-ho to just dive right in.
Dad never expected for me to, like, have to come here. It was always more that I wanted to, and he encouraged me to go elsewhere, try other things, make sure that I did, and I did come back. And even while I was working here, I did business schooling at Holland College. So whenever I did start as a teen, again, Dad had always been strict that we weren't allowed running around as kids and all that, which always felt like a shame. I know they got to as kids, but safety standards and all that, can't argue. But when I did start here, he was very clear he was not going to be the one training me or like having it be the interpersonal in that way.
Elga maybe had to correct me on a couple of things while she was training me in on the office. Don't think he ever got cross at me, though.
Not to your face.
Fair.
I'm sorry, Monica. I'm
No,
just torturing you. I'm just torturing you, dear.
Was it you that put the cinder block in the bag of yarn?
I might have put some weights and the extra weights on the bottom of it.
Miserable bunch of people.
And I know it sounds trite, but I might be the only Macausland here day to day, and Alex is involved, of course, too. But everyone does feel like family.